In this lecture, we're going to be talking about the Major Essay 3 peer review. And mostly we're going to be focusing through the lens of ethos in your essay, how to build it as a writer, and also how to give feedback to somebody on their ethos as a peer reviewer. So my first item I want to remind you of is to double check the peer review directions that are in the weekly folder. I think peer review is getting better and better from my perspective, and that's what I've been hearing from you guys too. So the directions are a little bit different this time, so make sure you double check what items you're going to be giving specific information on. So ethos is essentially, can your reader trust you? And we have been talking about various ways to do that in the last couple of weeks, but I wanted to take a second to put forward this idea that the reader really needs to trust you at every part of P's, at every part of your essay. And briefly, a reminder that in your point of each paragraph, your topic sentence gives your reader another reason to believe your thesis. So your strategy is to make that connection really clear, the connection between the topic sentence and the thesis. In the evidence portion, using evidence from a credible and reliable source shows your reader why your argument is reasonable. And a strategy we've been talking about is explaining the credibility of your source when you introduce the quote or the paraphrase. For right now, I'm going to skip talking about analysis because I want to spend a little bit more time on that. So I'm going to jump to summary. And in the summary, you want to remind your reader of how your paragraph has proven your point, right? So you want to make sure that your reader finishes the paragraph with confidence in your argumentation before they move on to your next point. Let's talk about analysis. Analysis is the crucial test of ethos, and analysis is honestly the hardest part of writing an essay. I think one myth that we come to essays with as a beginning writer is that using awesome quotes is the most important part of an argument. And I would say the truth is actually that a quote is only effective if your reader knows you understand what the source is saying. Right, so looking at our little illustrations, there's you going through the sources, trying to find a cool quote. Then there's you as the writer putting that quote information into your paper. But the third step, the most crucial step, is as your reader goes through your paper and is looking at your discussion of the sources, and most particularly your analysis of the sources, they need to be able to understand that you know what the source is saying. Because without that, it doesn't matter. You can use all the awesome quotes in the world, and if your reader thinks that you don't understand them, you have no credibility with them, and your argument has no credibility. One of the things that I hear most often from writers is that it is so hard to find the right words, right? Like, how can I find the right words to get this idea across? I don't know if I'm getting my point across. And that's absolutely the challenge of writing, right? Taking an idea from your brain and trying to put it on paper, handing that piece of paper off to a reader and hoping that they get it. And that's why peer review is so incredibly important, because it's giving the reader an outside perspective on if they're getting their point across, right? Because it can make sense in our own minds, but if it doesn't make sense to somebody else when they're reading it on the page, then we've essentially fallen down on our project. So keep that in mind this time as you're looking at Major Essay 3. Think of it as you're helping let your peer know where they're doing it well, right? Where their ideas coming across. Yes, right. Yes, I can see what you're trying to say with this source and that you understand what this source says. Or maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's not coming across as clearly as they had hoped. Only you can give the outsider perspective. It is so, so valuable. So here are some questions to ask yourself when you're peer reviewing. Has the writer shown they understand the quote? Things to watch for are vague summaries of the source material. For instance, if they give a quote and then say, I agree, and then move on to another idea, they maybe haven't explained what they're agreeing with. Another thing you'll see is, this is a great idea, but they don't show why it's a great idea or particularly what the great idea is that they are um, agreeing with. So the author makes a strong point. If you aren't telling me what that point is, then there's no way for me to know, right, that you get it. And so those are three things that I see pretty often. It's an attempt, right? It's an attempt to discuss the quote, but I'm not really seeing it. Another thing to watch for are quotes that have multiple ideas. If you are looking at the source material in an essay, use your fingers if you need to count how many ideas are in there, and then after the quote, make sure all of those ideas have been discussed, because if they haven't all been discussed, there's a hole there. Let them know. Probably the most helpful way you can give somebody feedback is letting them know if the wording of the explanation is unclear. Like maybe they have tried to summarize the quote in their own words, and you're really not sure if they understand the whole idea. So be honest and tell them, because that's the best feedback you can give. So here are some hints for a helpful review. Right. As we've been discussing, nothing can be improved is not an acceptable review. And that's because people want your thoughtful and honest inputs so that they can improve their essay. Here are a couple things to keep in mind. Even good things can be made better. You can compliment people on something and then give ideas on how to make it even cooler. Maybe there's a better verb that they could go for, or maybe the ideas could be broken into separate sentences. I bet you can come up with something. Also, you aren't trying to give your classmates the right answer, so you aren't trying to fix the problem for them. You're just wanting to give them ideas. So a couple formats for that kind of feedback is to say, what if you tried, or one idea is, and that might help somebody go in a positive direction without actually doing the work for them. The third point, it's also helpful to tell someone why something specific worked or was really strong, because if they know why it was awesome, they'll be able to do it again on purpose elsewhere. But keep in mind, you do need to explain why something was great or worked. Like maybe they had a super specific description, or maybe they came up with a beautiful verb. So let them know what was working. Sometimes helpful feedback is telling people what a piece of the writing made you think or feel. Is it reflect it back to them? Sometimes I frame feedback as, your sentence made me think blank. Is that what you meant for me to think? So this is a great way to tell your reader what you think they're saying and explain how you're interpreting their analysis of the source material. So this last point might be especially helpful as you're trying to give somebody feedback on the effectiveness of their analysis. Good luck with your review of Major Essay 3, and I hope the semester is wrapping up well for you.